How many times have you picked a piece that wasn't written on classical guitar originally, just to realize after hours and hours of practice or research that the arrangement you found is not very good actually? Now, not all of us are very good at making our own arrangements, but this shouldn't mean that we have to limit ourselves, right? Great composers like Beethoven often didn't write music for the classical guitar. So we have some arrangements though, but it's really hard to find the right ones that follow the original music well and still adapt comfortably to the classical guitar. That's why I was so skeptical when I got this book. Beethoven for classical guitar, that just stinks, right? And I always thought that playing Beethoven on classical guitar is something that sounds like a good idea in theory, but in practice it just doesn't work. Well, I'm not so sure about it anymore. So today's video was kindly brought to you by Matthew Ellul, who took the courage to write this book, including 50 classical guitar arrangements of Beethoven's music, and I have the immense pleasure to break this book down for you and to talk about my positive and negative experiences with it. Shall we? Before we dive deep into the content, just have a look at this first. You get a short introduction to the composer, Beethoven, but then here's the part I really liked immediately. You get a detailed explanation of the technical requirements, the notations, and all the markings used in the book. Now, on the top of that, the book directs you to a website where you can enjoy recordings to get an idea of how each piece sounds. I think that's absolutely great. Now, obviously, you have the content listed at the beginning of the book with page numbers. What I've never seen before is the list at the end that groups the pieces by difficulty level. While I think Matthew did an amazing job including this list in the book, I wasn't so happy to find it, right after I played through the entire book at the end. So I reached out to him and said something like it would have been nice to have it at the beginning of the book, or to have a note at the beginning that, hey, would you like to see the pieces listed by difficulty, turn to page 100 or whatever, just something like that. But it wasn't like a big complaint, it's a very small thing. But the way he responded just really shocked me. And before I tell you what he said, I have to explain something else first. Moving on to the actual content, you will see that the pieces are written with sheet music, and in a lower line you will find tabs, making this book inclusive for all guitarists. Now you will immediately notice also that the notation is a little bit larger than the traditional editions or traditional sheet music. And the reason behind this is that the people who are going to buy this book potentially are probably adults buying this book for themselves, and maybe some of them are not so young anymore. And I'm telling you, my poor mom can't read normal sized letters anymore, and sometimes this prevents her from reading a book. So she's obviously listening to audiobooks, but it's just so frustrating. And I found it a really small and nice thing. It's just so thoughtful to make the notation slightly bigger for people who don't have so good eyesight anymore. I also have 60+ years old students who are not so pleased when I send them a sheet music with, teeny tiny notations, and I totally can see why. So this is a really nice thing. Right before each piece, the author gives you a short explanation and helps you put the piece into context. And in general, I can say that the book includes orchestral works, string quartets, solo piano works, and songs with piano accompaniment. Now, why is this so important? Because the different instrumentations will teach you different things. So it requires a different kind of thinking to play an orchestra piece or to play a piano work arranged on classical guitar. So learning these different pieces won't only expand your repertoire, but will improve your sense of structure, form, and style. Now let's see the good and the bad things, starting with the good ones. Editing is great, it's readable and clear, and I also love the way the author introduces each pieces a little bit. Not too much, just the right amount. I'm gonna say it's good to have tabs, but this will come back later. I think the selection of the book is great because there are many popular pieces in the book that will make people want to buy it, but then it also introduces less known masterpieces as well. Also, the selection of the pieces helps the player to meet and understand the characteristics of the different instrumentations, and they are very, very well adapted to the guitar. Not to mention that in some pieces, Matthew included notes and melody lines that are often overlooked by arrangers. A good example of this would be Ode to Joy, which is a popular piece for guitar too, but Matthew gave it a fresh look. And also in Allegretto from Symphony No. 7, he included a melody that's often just being skipped. And I will just say it again, but I love the list being made by difficulty. And remember when I said this will come back later? So I said Matthew a few things I wasn't so happy about this book, and we're talking about teeny tiny things like the difficulty list at the end, or for example, something with the spine. So if you look at my version, you will see that the notation goes very, very close to the spine, making it hard to read sometimes. But these are small things. But he said, yeah, no problem, I will fix it. And I was like, wait a minute, how would you do that? You already published the book, it's done. How would you do that? And apparently he did fix it, and the ones you can buy now are different from mine, so they won't have the same problems as my version, which makes it really, really hard to complain about this book. But do you think it can stop me? So if I really want to say something bad, it's going to be this. Tabs are double-edged swords. They make classical music more inclusive and accessible to everyone who can't read standard notation, but at the same time they don't have the motivation to learn to read anymore. Therefore, they will never unlock the deeper connection between the notes. They will just play the right notes at the right time. But there's gonna be a limit to that from where they can't level up anymore. So sheet music contains much more information than tabs, and in order to bring out the maximum of these pieces, you need to understand the different melody voices, the form and the structure. And I just don't see how that's possible with tabs. So it's good to have tabs as an option, but it's everyone's individual responsibility to understand the limits of it. It's also not like a big deal, but I did change a few fingerings here and there when I was playing from the book. But I like to think about fingerings more as like suggestions coming from the composer or the editor, and then it's my personal responsibility to find the best fingering for my musical ideas, for my technique and for my hands. But what I also saw that when Matthew chose these fingerings, he put form and musicality on the top priority level, and you will see what I mean. What you have to know about Matthew is that he's an award-winning composer, instrumentalist, and educator with over 20 years of experience. So he doesn't only understand music from the perspective of a guitarist, but also as a composer. So he obviously knows one or two things about music. If you look up Fur Elise on classical guitar on YouTube, 90% of the recordings are going to go like this. Suggests this fingering. Did you hear the difference? So in the first version, the overlapping notes created this weird muddiness, but then once we stopped playing on open strings, the melody cleans out, which is kind of nice, but then we have the problem of inconsistency. So the first problem was the muddiness, and the second problem is the inconsistency in interpretation. And simply just by putting the melody notes on the same string, starting on the second string and not playing on open strings, it just cleans out the melody from the very first note. And this is just one small example coming from the book, how Matthew just tried to think more from the musical perspective too, rather than just using only guitarist brain. So all in all, I really think this book fills a gap in classical guitar repertoire. I highly recommend it. If I wouldn't recommend it, this video wouldn't exist, obviously. And as I said, it's not easy to find good Beethoven arrangements for classical guitar, and here you get 50 of them. There are a bunch of songs or pieces in this book which I've never heard of. During my studies, I haven't played a single piece written by Beethoven on classical guitar because I always felt that something was missing. And when I see this book, I see that Matthew was trying to interpret the pieces in the most honest way possible on the classical guitar. So I'm really happy to see that the next generations of classical guitar students will have the opportunity to learn Beethoven on classical guitar, because you can only learn so much from great composers like he was. And if you would like to have this amazing book in your collection, check out the link in the description down below where you can buy this book for yourself, as well as you will find a link to my Patreon page where you can support my art and work on a monthly basis. So if you would like to see more videos like this one on the channel in the future, please consider to become a patron. Thank you so much for watching, and if you would like to hear my interpretation of Fur Elise based on this arrangement, check out this video here, and see you in a bit.